Everybody, welcome back. Bio Bros Ep4. This one's about bringing nature into your home. We've got me, Shaw, of course, and Alex,
Heyo.
and new guest this time, Owen.
Hello, hello.
All right, so little history on Owen before we get going. He's one of our other buddies. He is mainly nowadays into like high-end collector anthuriums, pretty cool stuff, but he's also into fish, reptiles, all that stuff as well. So we'll talk to him a little bit more about that, but little history. So bringing nature into your home, this is about not being ashamed as much of having fish tanks and things, especially like our culture. We like want to put your snake, you want to put them in like a closet somewhere where people can't see it, and we kind of think that's not always the best thing. You can actually bring it out into your home and using plants as home decor and stuff like that too. So, Alex, you want to kick us off with something to get talking about?
Yeah, so like a lot of people have always frowned upon um having like reptiles in their homes, like out on display and stuff like that. They've always had like a specific room that they hide them in, or they have them just like you said, hidden away in a closet or something like that. And that's I feel like a lot of times that's because of how the hobby used to be, where it would always be something simple and cheap and it wouldn't look all that great. And so people were like, I love my animals, but they don't fit the decor, they don't look good. But nowadays, with us getting more and more into things like bioactives and paludariums and ripariums and all that kind of stuff, where it's just like basically a slice of the jungle inside of these tanks. I know I like to use plants and things like that for decor. So for people like that, it just brings like a slice of the desert or the jungle into your home.
Yeah, like Owen's got a really nice little, I guess we call it like paludarium for one of your frogs, and that tank looks awesome. Like it's like a piece of art in your helm. Like
Thank you.
it's not
Thank
as
you.
like this tank that frogs are in. You wouldn't even know that the frog's in there necessarily, and you'd still think it was super cool.
Yeah, that's one of the things about that tank that I've found that is it's interesting. I ended up designing this whole big grand display piece of a tank that I was like I want it to be like a slice of the rainforest. And the motivation behind that was I had a tree frog in mind that I was like head over heels in love with the species, the Crusiohyla craspidopus, I think is how you say it, or the fringe leaf frog. And to me, that's like a real life Pokemon of an animal. That's like Venusaur come to life in the size of a tree frog. And the love for that species kind of drove that whole motivation for that build. Eventually, the goal is to have a breeding pair in there, but upon adding the frog to the enclosure as of recently, you know, 90% of the time it's like, where's the frog? Like I can't find it. It's like it's a hunt for the frog. It's so big and it's so packed with plants. It's constantly trimming it and just hunting for the frog. But it's awesome. It really invites you into looking at the paludarium and looking into it a little bit deeper and really looking around all of its corners. So yeah, it's been a big passion project of mine lately, and it's ongoing, and I love it.
Yeah, it
Yeah, I
feels
think
like
that stuff's
a
super cool. Um,
yeah,
like you can have like art for real. Like the whole thing. Or I know very little about traditional art forms, but one of the things is your painting's good when people look at it for more than 2 seconds. And
Absolutely.
like when you can make that happen without having to use paint or sculpture, things like that, you can use actual like biological living materials and stuff. You can use plants and rocks and sticks and put them in like nice patterns where it's composed like a painting, and you can look in there and spend 5 minutes looking at it and uncovering more and more details. Like to me, that's cooler than having a piece of art on your wall. Like that's ultra cool to me.
Yeah, and to build off of that, that is something like that I went to school for, was photography. It was a Bachelor of Fine Arts in photography, so I did study a lot of art, and I did practice a lot of different mediums. So that was kind of something that I found really cool about this hobby, especially aquariums and vivariums and terrariums and paludariums and all the ariums. is that it's really it's living art. That's really what it is. On top of the the fact that it is encouraging people to create these habitats that are not designed to make an animal survive, but to make them thrive. So that was something that I found really interesting about the hobby. I found a lot of techniques that I learned when I was in school and practicing different mediums in art, like sculpture and like woodworking and metalworking, painting, drawing, you name it. You find a lot of those techniques in those mediums blending with, building a terrarium or building a tank of some sort. It's a whole process, and it's part of the the joy of it for me. I love it.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna say. Is like it's when building like a slice of the jungle or something like that. It's you are an artist basically because it takes so many different aspects of different types of art and different types of like building and all that kind of stuff that to do it that it just you're making an art piece basically and it doesn't even have to be a terrarium with an animal in it. You could just do it with just plants and still make it look like a piece of art in your house because it's like that is gorgeous. And then you have so many packed with plants. You're like you're constantly looking and finding new little plants and things like that. And even with like the like you were talking about with your frogs, it adds a new aspect to the tanks too, to where like when you're looking at them, you're not just looking at the beauty of the plants and things like that, and then like, oh look, there's the frog. It adds almost that aspect of, ooh, let me see if I can find the frog. Let me see if I can find this lizard or this snake, and it adds that like challenge to it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of all that kind of stuff, and there's also the, like, mental benefits of having being around plants and animals, and you hear about, like, running water, hearing those noises, people have a little fountain on their kitchen counter or something like that, like, all that stuff is very easily achievable through, like, terrariums, vivariums, and even just houseplants too, like, we'll get into it in a second, but, like, Owen has some pretty crazy plants, he keeps his houseplants, and that's super cool, like, now you have this environment that doesn't feel like you're in an office cubicle. Your home actually feels like where you want to vacation, and that's another really cool thing about using this hobby as a different aspect of your entire life, like, you can really have it change your whole life if you do it right and you really are focused on that. If you want these tanks to look good and be something that other people enjoy, you can do that, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. I think they think about having a bunch of animals in their house, and they think of the gross hoarders, and that's just not true, like, it just isn't. It's was true and is true for most people because the mindset is a lot of quantity over quality for most, like, reptile breeders and things, but for just a general hobbyist, you can really just go quality. Just have a really nice big tank that you put a lot of effort into, and it will turn out very nice.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't agree more. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I think has resonated with me with the reptile hobby and the amphibian hobby and the aquarium hobby is really it's quality over quantity. Always. It's always has been. Less is always more. In my eyes, especially if you can take less and make the most of it. Really making a habitat that is not only a statement piece, but like just overall the most perfect environment for this animal to live out its entire life in. It's incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
another thing too, like, I noticed with that same, like, size and quality thing, I have a reef tank that I inherited from my grandfather, and long time it was kept, how you normally would with a good few fish in there, some larger fish, a couple smaller fish, and over the years, as some of the fish have passed away, and mostly due to old age, like, we got some seriously old fish in there too, uh, I haven't really been replacing them, and just slowly going down, and I think there's only, let's see, 3 fish in the 75-gallon tank right now, and I love it. I wanna add a couple more small fish, but I love it, like, you really see these natural behaviors that you just don't see when you really pack your tanks full. So even though there's less fish, it feels like there's more because all those fish in there are truly comfortable in their home, and they have their own territories, and they have a home that they really feel is theirs. and then the other fish has a home that they actually feel is theirs and isn't constantly being encroached on by other stuff, and so I think the tank looks better with less in it.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
I completely agree as well. And then also adding on to like the health benefits and stuff. Not only is it like health benefits from seeing these visuals and also hearing like the water and things like that, but also the plants just themselves exchanging that CO2 for oxygen. Now, it's not like a super clean or anything like that, but they have proven that a lot of plants do help clean the air in your homes. And so it could help with that as well. I'm not saying it's a cure all or anything like that, but it is something you can look into too. And then also, we all were saying quality over quantity with the decor aspect of that. Like if you're bringing these slice of jungle into your home or desert into your home and things like that, which again, we're not just talking about just the jungles. You can do amazing bioactives of an arid setup, and it can look just as cool in your home as like a display piece. But bigger enclosures benefit not only the animal because bigger is always better, but it also looks better in the home. Like instead of having a ton of little tiny enclosures for like different animals and things like that, or not even those, so like smaller enclosures, one big enclosure for like one species, it helps like just the animals thrive like crazy, and then also it helps like match that into decor almost because it's not just a bunch of little things, it's one big display.
Yeah, it definitely helps get rid of that hoarder vibe, and when you have a bunch of little tanks running around, it does potentially look more like you're a hoarder or a breeder, and those are not the same thing, I'm just saying that that's the vibe that people will get. So tons of breeders do it awesome, they're not hoarders, but when you have a huge tank, it looks almost, like it looks like you wanted it to be there. It looks like you really planned it out and put it in there like you would any other piece of art in your home, and that definitely pays off. Is it is definitely worth the extra investment. I've been much more happy with buying bigger and better setups, making it take longer due to budget reasons. You don't wanna drop all that money on that huge tank at once, so you slowly piece it together than having just a quick, easy fix. I think you get in what you put out, like, put in a lot of effort, you'll get a good result. Throw something together, and you'll get something that looks thrown together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I completely agree. And then
That-
use using things too outside of the tank, like house plants and stuff. It almost also helps hide it in as a decor piece because and also makes it look like the jungle's coming outside of the tank and into your home, like putting a bunch of house plants, tropical house plants around like a tropical tank or a bunch of cacti around an arid tank. And it just almost brings that environment also into the home, which I think is really cool.
And things like
yeah.
riparian planters and ripariums in general, uh, the plants do come out, and you can if you select your plants correctly, you can really, like, vine all the way around and have that source of the vine be an aquarium. It's super cool. But kinda on the houseplant thing, we're all here either have had or do have grow tents for all of our plants, and I'm sure we'll all say the same thing that we hate them.
Absolutely. Mine's right behind me in my living room right now, and it takes up about half the living room. It's just a big, ugly black box that just it's just such an eyesore compared to this. Being on the topic of bringing the houseplants into the space and making it look more organic and not so cold and like what's the word I'm looking for? It's not so like mundane and like just I don't know. Organic's
Yeah,
really the way to go with it.
you feel like you're in
Having
an
the plants
office
around us.
cubicle, not your
Right,
home.
exactly. Yeah, that's where I'm going with it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're not knocking grow tents because they do have their purposes. There is certain species you cannot grow in just open air in your house, but again, they don't have that like, aspect of that's pretty. It's like Owen says, a black box in the corner somewhere, and you're like, well, that's taking up a lot of space. But like you're saying making things look organic, like right next to me where I'm recording right now, I have my two big Tycons and then a bunch of other smaller plants all around them, and it just makes me feel like I'm almost sitting in a jungle recording. Like it's brings a bunch of life to my room.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking grow tents, like, I have one for a reason, and I could not keep all the plants that I love without it, especially in my climate, like, I need a environment where I can control the lighting and humidity a lot easier, and the grow tent is an amazing way of doing that, but I wish I could display some of my plants, like, I have some really pretty plants that I really like, my Nepenthes ampullaria black miracle, for instance, is that thing's putting on tons of size right now, it's starting to make ground basils for the first time, like, it's looking really good, but no one can ever see it, and I only get to see it pretty much in the morning and night when I check on the plants, make sure everything's okay in there, and then when I water them, and that's it. So I would much rather have that in, like, somehow able to be in my home, and definitely some, like, collector stuff will happen like that, and you kinda need a controlled environment, but there's tons of awesome houseplants, like, all the Monstera deliciosa variants are super easy to keep, and all
Oh
different
yeah.
colors and all that. But then even,
But
like, Owen's keeping some pretty fancy anthuriums just out in his living room.
yeah, I mean, for anthuriums, I don't really have a ton of like crazy fancy stuff in the living room. I do have a pretty nice crystallinum that I've been keeping in my living room for a while, and that's doing pretty all right. Not really anthurium related, but I do have a philodendron spirit of sanctity in my living room. I have a big anthurium veitchii. Uh, that's from NSE. It's like 5 years old or something. It's massive. It's in a trash can. Um, I've got some philodendron UPI around, and a couple of the other bit more basic things. But yeah, definitely like looking at like the spirit of sanctity in the corner of my living room, like that. 2 years ago, that was God, that was cartel level money for just a piece of it, and now it's tissue culture really brought it down. So I'm a little bit more comfortable with it being here because it wouldn't be so much of a financial loss if it did end up tanking in a living room humidity setting with about 35%. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think a lot of
Um,
people too, they think houseplants are think only things you can find at Home Depot, but that's not necessarily true, like, you do really have a lot of options for houseplants, and just experiment with them. Worst case is you have to hurry and toss it back in your tent, right? Like, that's what we'd all do here, and I've done before too, like, I did that with actually, Owen, you have it now, that money tree, the variegated
yeah,
money, just it was not doing well in my tent at all, like, it was not happy. So I took it out of my tent, put it in normal household conditions, and it started blowing up, and then that was about the time it got sent over to you.
yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of the mainstream plants that we do tend to circulate in cultivation for the plant collecting hobby tend to be more of the humidity loving plants, and that doesn't really include like the cacti and the succulents that people do collect, because that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But you
no.
know there are some plants that it's just not always, it's not always best to have them just blasted with humidity, like money trees, for instance. Just touching on that, they tend to do better in lower humidity. They just tend to rot. It's too wet for them to be in a tent condition and thrive. um so there are plants that do prefer a little bit less, and there are plants that they can't live without it. So just got to
Yeah.
find what fits their needs and let it rock.
Oh
And
yeah.
basic is good too, like, Epiprimium arinum or the golden pothos, that's a good
Hmm.
plant. Like, it's really popular and everyone has it everywhere, but that's a good plant. You let that thing grow for a few years, especially if you get it on a pole, get some big leaves going. That's a nice plant. Like, that's good. There's a reason it's popular. Things don't get popular because they're bad.
No,
Right,
definitely
absolutely.
not.
I mean, and to add to that, I think people discredit golden pothos quite a bit. And, for me, I credit it a lot because that's, to be completely honest with you, that's what got me into this hobby of plant collecting. That's what started it all for me. To give a little backstory, I did start with aquariums first. That was my very first like step into this whole world of reptiles, fish, amphibians, plants, you name it. It started with aquariums, and I was watching videos, and people were like, "Oh, throw a vine of golden pothos in your water column. It helps filter the water." And I'm like, "Huh, okay." Let me go to Home Depot, pick that up, and I threw it in my tank. It thrived. And I'm like, what else can I grow? I kind of like the way this looks, and it spiraled out of there, from that point.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, and
that I think we've
speaking of
all done the golden pothos in the aquarium at some point, watching all
You
those
have to.
videos on it on YouTube, and
It's
you're
a
like,
rite of
"What?"
passage. It's a rite of passage.
Uh-huh.
You have to.
it definitely is.
And that's almost the same thing I did too, like, kinda getting into plants, like, I wanted to make a paludarium because 'cause I'd never had one before, and part of that meant I needed plants, and I had nowhere to start other than golden pothos, and so I was
Absolutely.
like, "I don't want that though," 'cause I've done that, I want something different, so that led me down to researching plants, and then now it's all out of hand. I've got plants everywhere.
Out
Yeah.
of hand is definitely the term that my girlfriend likes to use sometimes. So totally get it.
No, I completely understand that. And then also, actually, speaking of aquariums, Owen, you have a really nice high tech, at least I consider it high tech because it's more than I will ever do.
It's
55 that
definitely
you use as a display tank in your it's in your living room, I think,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It is in my living
Oh,
room. It's right next to me where I'm recording actually. It's the most high tech I've ever gone. It's a 55-gallon, fully planted freshwater tank. The showpiece fish, or the whole motivation behind this tank, was the spotted Congo puffer, or I believe it's the Tetradon shodenai puffer. Um, got a bunch of different common names for that one, but spotted Congo is typically the most the used one. But that was the motivation behind the tank, and I wanted to sort of give it an all-out display tank feel. Load it with a whole bunch of different plants, colorful plants, basics to rare, um, CO2 demanding to, the most simple of simple plants are in there. Uh, Running a pretty decent sized canister filter on it that was recommended by Harrison, actually.
oh,
Shout out Harrison. Uh, got a, what is it, Twin Star, uh, full spectrum LED light on top, UNS CO2 system running on it, inline heater built into the canister lines. Yeah, I didn't really cut any corners on it, and you know, it's one of my favorite things I have.
well, I will
Yeah.
say too, with that kind of stuff, a lot of people don't like with like the displays and like you set it up to where it's gonna be like a display tank. It's gonna look amazing. The plants are gonna grow in. It's gonna look like a slice of a river. And a lot of people who keep like bigger fish, which I would consider a Congo puffer slightly bigger, not massive, but a bigger fish. They don't do that kind of stuff. It's a basic tank normally with gravel on the bottom or sand on the bottom and like driftwood and rocks. And they don't do any plants because they're all scared of it tearing up the tank. Like you're showing with your Congo puffer that you can do it because you have a high tech tank with all these rare plants and common plants and stuff as well. But he's at least not from what you've told us at all, he's not really messing with the plants. And yes, some fish will mess with them with more and stuff, but a lot of people who keep these bigger, like showpiece fish don't want to have that tank just out in their living room because it's just a fish and nothing
It's a
good about
box
it.
with a fish floating around, and it tends to be an
Yeah.
eyesore typically. So, um, yeah, puffers are really what like are my like pride and joy when it comes to aquariums. That's what got me like really hooked on the hobby is puffers in specific. I got my first puffer fish from this local fish store, mom and pop shop. It's been around for 50 years. He got one figure eight puffer in, and he didn't really know much about it, and I didn't really know much about it at the time. And in my uh, ignorance at the time of being in the hobby, I just was like, "That's cool. Let me take that home," not knowing anything about its history. Uh, you know, that poor fish did teach me a lot because I definitely didn't give it the life it deserved, but it did teach me a ton about researching beforehand, being fully confident and having a, prepared setup before you bring it home, etc. But that's what got me hooked on the puffers. I dove deep into that world and that community of fish keepers, and I gave this fish the best home I could. I wanted to load it with plants. I wanted to give it, incredible hardscape, because, it brings out the natural behaviors of the fish when you do something like that, instead of just putting it in a, bare bottom tank with, the bare minimum hardscape and a couple plants here and there just to, brighten up the space a little bit. You'll find behaviors with puffers specifically, like freshwater puffers. If you do set them up in a tank like that, they'll actually punch holes in the leaves. They'll bite holes in them. And that's not anything that I've experienced with my current setup. Just because he has the square footage to sort of establish territory and find hunting grounds, and there's a lot of breaks in the lines of sight for him, so it does keep him mentally sort of stimulated and constantly moving around and just vibing out doing his thing. So yeah, I love it, and he's my pride and joy.
I noticed that kinda same thing you were talking about how the behavior of the animals change when you move them into a setup that actually looks better too anyway. My snake
Always.
for a yeah, my snake for a long time was in just a normal, like, basic snake tank, aspen bedding, warm hide, cool hide, water bowl kinda deal, right? Ultra simple, ultra easy, and he hid in his hides all the time, like, I very rarely saw him, and then when I upgraded him to a naturalistic, like, display tank where it actually looked good, and, like, that was the goal was mainly selfish, I wanted the tank to look nice. I was kinda tired of these boring tanks sitting around. I kinda wanted it to look nice, and of course, it'd be an upgrade for him too, that's bonus. And the second I moved him into there, he completely changed as a snake, like, he was constantly out and exploring, and it was way better, like, every aspect was better about it. The house looked nicer, he was happier, I enjoyed it more, it was great, like you said earlier, you didn't cut corners on your tank, and everything about it's better. Your home is improved, your animals are improved, you're more motivated to take care of it, like, it was awesome, and so I always recommend that, like, go big, go naturalistic, put a lot of effort into it, and you can really elevate your whole thing, like, everything's just better.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. And I will say though, not every specific animal will do well in these kinds of setups because some animals just it stresses them out too much, and that's something you have to watch with your animals too. You have to watch their stress levels and like how they're reacting and things like that because sometimes you'll have a snake that would thrive in a fully decked out bioactive tank that's on display all the time and you're walking by all the time and it's perfectly fine. And then sometimes you'll have a snake that every time you walk by will strike at the glass and hurt itself. Or like a good example I have, I set up my golden blue leg baboon that I have, which is a tarantula. And I set it up in a 5 gallon, which is a large tank for her size, and did live plants, cork bark, and all that stuff, a whole bunch of soil for her to dig in and stuff. And I've seen her out of her hide once since I put her in there. Like, it's not always gonna bring out an animal. Some species, they just go, "Nope," and go into the hide. And that's just depending on the animal. It's different for each animal because each one has their own characteristics and their own behaviors that's specific to them and not just a species as a whole.
Yeah, and, like, my turtles are in a very ugly setup. It is not pretty. It's one of those above ground pools. Their landing platform is made out of egg crate light diffuser bricks and a tub for sand so they can lay eggs when it's breeding season in. Their hides are bricks. It is not pretty. Filter's a trash can. But, that's what the turtles need. They're just so destructive. A really pretty display for turtles is so hard to build because they just love
Expensive.
destruction. Like, I'm convinced that they're trying to break the pumps. I never have pumps last in there, and it's always the most nonsense thing that breaks them. And I know it's like, you guys have to enjoy costing me money at this point. It's just
They,
it is not worth it for me to really try to create this ultra delicate scape in their pond. They're just gonna break it. But
oh yeah.
that's just how it goes. Some species fit better, and that's part of, the topic is bringing nature into your home is making a good decision. Like, you know how hard it's gonna be to make a very pretty setup for a reticulated python? Like, dude, you need not just one room dedicated to that. You need 3 or 4 rooms dedicated to that thing if you want it to be a really pretty display setup.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of it too, is doing your research. Finding an animal that will you both want to keep and are comfortable with keeping, and comfortable with taking care of, but also that is not gonna go past your means. Because, like you were saying with your turtles, they're in above ground pool and stuff. Really, the only way you could do a pretty setup for them is if you did an in ground natural pond. But not many people have 20 grand laying around to do something like that for a couple of $5 turtles. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it because they're $5 turtles, but most people don't have that kind of money laying around. And the basics are basics for a reason. They're still good, they still work. We're not saying that this is for everybody, but it does help with those kinds of things. And as again, like I said, as part of your research behind it, you need to find the correct species that works for you in your home and for a design you would like. Because like some people will like jungle designs more. Some people will like a leopard gecko in a fully decked out arid design, or a bearded dragon in a fully decked out arid design. Um, and then it just depends on the species, and you have to do your research. Research plants, research animals, because there's also certain plants that can't go in with certain animals, like bearded dragons, because they will eat plants. You have to make sure you're not putting a plant in there that would be toxic for that animal.
That's important too, like and you can still make lots of really cool stuff, like, there's a guy on Instagram, I don't remember what his name is on there, but he's from Australia. Australia has very strict rules on what animals you can and can't keep, and he has awesome bioactive tanks for all of his animals, and they're heavily planted, all of them. And for species that you would think aren't heavily planted, so you definitely can make it happen, it's just harder, and like you said, Alex, you said it's not for everybody, but I do think it's for most people, though. Most people
Yes.
have 1 or 2 reptiles, 1 or 2 fish tanks, something like that, like, they don't have a lot of stuff, and I think most people just don't even realize that you can make this just as good as or better than a real traditional art piece, and you can, like, I think that's what your goal should be for the most part is having a really nice thing in your home you can be proud of and proud that your animals live in that.
Yeah, I think like building off of what you said, it is for most people, but like you said, most people don't realize they can do it because I think a lot of people think it's way harder than it is. Like, yes, it is difficult, but like if you do your research, there's so many YouTube videos out there, so many like forums and all that kind of stuff online that you can find and do your research on how to do this, and it's not that difficult to make a really nice bioactive enclosure if you do your research. A lot of people I feel like don't realize that. They just look at it as a whole and go, "Ooh, that seems like a lot of work. That's not for me." And the other thing too they can change too is using things like automatic misters or automatic foggers, and timers on your lights and things like that. Like it can be also a little bit automated to where it makes it easier for you as the keeper. You're not having to constantly stay directly on top of everything. But it's just like I said, research. Once you figure out the species, figure out what plants you want, and you can figure out how to build something that you would like in an easier way. There's ways that are super difficult, like I saw a guy recently on YouTube where he was building the background and he used concrete and things like that, which that's more towards the higher end. And then there's other ways where they do the spray foam and just press in dirt and it's still gonna look good. It just depends on you, what you think you can do and what you think looks good.
Yeah, and,
Absolutely.
here, you go ahead, Owen.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, there's definitely different techniques for building enclosures, and I've been experimenting with a few different types. I've tried the spray foam, dry lock method, and for me personally, it's not something that I have the finesse to do. I know there's a lot of people that can pull off those like style tanks and make them look incredible and make them very functional. But for me, they just never really panned out. too great. I think the most recent method that I've been using that's been very successful is using the 2-inch thick cork insulation sheets that Harrison actually introduced to me. It's I think popularized by Troy Goldberg, the Dart Frog Keeper on YouTube. Um,
Mm.
and it essentially that's just it's actually it's very different than most building styles of for tanks. Typically, when we think of building a tank, we're adding to a build, like we're adding to a scape, we're adding branches, we're adding rocks, hardscape, etc. But this is a very deductive style of building a tank, and I find that I mesh really well with deductive styles of work, especially when it comes to like art. When I was in school making art, when I was in sculpture, I was big on like starting with something and then taking away from it to create something new. And that's what this style of building tanks really is. And it's you take the cork sheets, you silicone them on, you attach your hardscapes to it and your hardscape pieces to it, especially like branches and whatnot. And then from there, you chip away at it. You take away pieces and you carve and carve and carve, and it's hours of work, but the end result for me has always been just incredible. So yeah,
Oh yeah, and I
And
mean that's a simple-ish way, and like you can also do things like what they call I'm blanking on the thing. Cork bark mosaics where you
cork
just take
rounds.
like
Yeah,
yeah cork rounds or cork flats and you like break them up and you just silicone those directly to the glass and then fill in between with like sphagnum moss and plants that have planted in between and stuff, and those look amazing too. I mean, I have several tanks where it's just that too, and they're
yeah,
super simple. I mean, like I said, it's just all you need is cork bark and silicone and sphagnum moss and you've had a tank.
yeah.
and you
I
can
mean,
combine
that
all
was
these
the
styles
first.
too.
That was the first style tank I had ever really built, was just the cork rounds and flats in the mosaic style. And that tank that I built, I want to say like 3, almost 4 years ago, is still up and running, and I haven't changed a thing about it. It runs flawlessly. So I mean, there are things that I have had to like do to it, like adding extra, cleanup crews, so like isopods and springtails, like the normal stuff when it comes to maintaining an enclosure, a bioactive enclosure. But as far as like the hardscape goes, and the enclosure itself, it's more of a, you do it right the first time and you set it and forget it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can combine all the different methods too. Like I have a tank where I kind of combines the cork panel and the cork mosaic together a little bit,
Mhm.
and there's there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like you'll see
Not at
people
all.
create a structure out of foam and Drylock to represent more of a rock, and then use the more like organic materials to represent more of like, organic materials like trees and roots and things like that. And you can combine all those. Like don't watch one YouTube video and think that's the way to do it, or that you can only do that. Like watch everything and combine them and do whatever you want that you think will look best for your vision. And the other thing I like to do is I like to look at pictures of the wild habitats. I try to get as
Yes.
close to that, and I'll fixate on one little area and be like, "I like how that stack of rocks is," and I'll try to
Mhm.
mimic that exact stack of rocks in my tank.
Yeah, that's another thing. And sometimes I find inspiration in ecosystems and habitats that aren't even related to like what I am building. So like a rainforest setting, because I typically go towards the rainforest side of things. I'll go walk through trails, and I mean, I know you guys know this. I've sent photos in our little Instagram group chat of like, oh, this is inspirational for like a build, or you know, there's like pieces of things in the woods and like that I just like little nooks and crannies that are just like, I want to replicate that. I want that in my living room. I was on a big tree stump kick for a long time, and it was just like these really decaying, rotted tree stumps that were just withering away, but moss and all these epiphytic ferns and whatnot were like growing out of the crevices and cracks of it as it was falling apart. And that was a huge inspiration for some of my builds for a long time. I wanted to replicate something like that, and I never really got to it, but someday I will, because I love it. But yeah, just finding what's around you, use everything around you as inspiration, and put it into make it happen. Put it into your work.
Oh yeah, and like building off of like the doing it like looking up photos and things like that. Like you can look up photos from the region that your animal's from, and like but also look at where in the environment the animal would actually be. Like if it's a gecko that lives on the ground, looking at like the ground and how it's set up and things like that, and trying to replicate that. Or if they're up in the trees, looking how it is up in the trees and how like what plants kind of plants are growing and things like that, and trying to replicate that. And then
Yeah,
you can also with things like leopard geckos, their environment, or they're not in their well, yeah, their environment, but they're also um, native range is so wide. You can go from making a completely arid setup, which would work for a leopard gecko because that's where they're found, to they've recently been finding them in moist forests, like deciduous forests in Iran. They've been finding leopard geckos. So like they're such a wide range. You could do one or the other.
yeah, and like you said, looking at the ground, that's actually been my biggest struggle right now is I'm building a vivarium for my bearded dragon, and trying to replicate that ground that bearded dragons are found on, that's actually been the hardest part because I want it to be really accurate, I want it to look really nice, and trying to find that dirt is the hardest part, but I'm taking my time on it, I'm really trying to get this right, I want it to look exactly like that Australian dirt and have that same kinda texture and feel to it, but I'm gonna transition slightly off topic a little bit just because I think it's cool. Owen's working with some cool stuff in the plant world right now, getting into breeding and all that. I mean, I don't know exactly how much you want to or can share necessarily because I know other people are involved, but can you talk a little bit about that? That stuff's pretty interesting to me.
Into the Ethereum breeding world. You two both know my history with plants. It really started with just, what was hot at the time, and then it got into the really heavy variegation phase, which, I'm
The
ashamed to say
sport
it, but I
hunter.
will, I will, I will take ownership of that. It did happen. It was a big part of, my collecting at one point in time. But you grow and you mature a little bit, and I've gotten into Anthurium pretty heavily. That's kind of the direction my collection has gone, aside from like vivarium plants. Um, but yeah, Anthurium breeding is pretty big in my world right now. What questions do you got about it?
Like, what are you what are you working with specifically? Like, what's your goal with these breeding things? Like, you say breeding, and so for
Yeah,
those who don't know, plants work just like other animals too. Like you can cross two individuals and there's male and female. Some plants have both male and female, and some are male and female individuals. And thurium are both. But
both.
like,
Yeah.
what are your goals with this breeding?
So goals with breeding. Noticing a lot of, you know, very few individuals having very high tier plants or high caliber plants, so to speak. A lot of pure species, wild clones, you name it. It's expensive. Only a few people have this clone or that clone, and I do have some of those clones in my collection. That do reach the pretty high dollar mark, but my goal is to really produce a lot of pure species offspring to offer into cultivation again, as well as I do want to dabble with hybrids a little bit. I think complex hybrids can be a lot of fun. I think people get a little bit too caught up in the it's this crossed with this mixed with this with also this mixed into it. And it's just like I get it, it's cool, but what's the goal behind it? And really, with hybrids, for me, I think is where you can sort of have some fun in that part of the hobby. Is if you have a goal in mind, like I want to produce something that has this crazy emergent leaf with this specific color, kind of like what Doc Block is doing. Um, that's a lot of fun, and I think it's often overlooked. People are, I notice a lot of Anthurium people that collect typically just will pollinate whatever they have, available. They'll just throw pollen on something just to say they created something, and like that's cool. I get it, but I really like the idea behind breeding with a purpose. Like, what is your goal? What do you want out of this, cross? What are you trying to, offer to cultivation? Um, so really, that's why I stick to pure species, and I do want to get into like some complex hybrids with just some fun colors. So
Yeah, I'm kind of on that same team. It's a bit of a loaded question because I kind of knew it already because we discussed. But
yeah,
I'm into the Nepenthes, and Nepenthes are notorious for the classic. Both of these are in bloom right now. Hybrid special.
Yes.
Especially like Nepenthes are male and female exclusive. So if this plant is a male, it is a male. If that plant's a female, it is a female. So you can't ever cross them back to themselves and create more of essentially the same plant. And their pollen doesn't store great. So you get a ton of hurry, I need to put pollen. This plant's receptive. And so you have all these
Yes.
insane hybrids that have no goal to them. And so I'm the same way. Like with my plants, if I want a hybrid, I want a hybrid that has this plant and this plant because they have both traits that are going to complement each other in an individual later if I'm going to have a hybrid. Other than that, let's just keep the species pure because they're already great.
Right, absolutely. And that's to speak to that a little bit. I just had a cross that I successfully created that is more of along the lines of it's a complex hybrid. But there was a goal in mind behind it. The goal was I really want like a very colorful emergent leaf. That's I think what most people find the most attractive about anthuriums is their emergent leaf color. So I took a Bessier Af or however you say that species or well not species but you know what I mean Bessier Af. And crossed it with a Doc Block F2 that a buddy of mine has. That he's kind of coined the name of Curly Red Bastard for that individual plant. And it gets the name because the inflorescence on that specific specimen is very weird. It has a very curly inflow, which is not normal of, most anthurium aside from Wenlingerii. Uh, so yeah, it was just a colorful cross. The Doc Block line has always been notorious for the deep reds, the purples, the pinks, you name it, the really bright, vibrant colors. And then Bessier obviously is just it's like an oil slick rainbow emergent leaf. So took the best of both worlds, combined them, and we got our first generation of offspring growing up right now. I think I got about 250-ish offspring of that, and I did a split with my buddy who donated the pollen, and gonna grow them out and selectively offer some colorful babies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I will
that's
say I think
go
with
ahead,
like
I'm
the
sorry.
anthuriums, sorry, I think with the anthuriums, like you're saying, the emergent leaf color is a big thing for people because like one of like one of the like very few anthuriums I keep is red crystal X luxurians, which its emergent leaves when they come in, they are bright, like a bright, very dark red. And as they mature, the stems are still staying that red, but as they mature, they gain turn that more green, but they have the texture of a luxurians. So it's still a really cool plant just because of the texture, but those emergent leaves are like really, really pretty red, which I think is a
Oh
big
yeah,
thing with anthuriums.
And I don't think
absolutely.
there's an issue with having your goal of hybrids not necessarily being visual. It's another common one in Nepenthes. I'll just use an example of because it's off the top of my head. Nepenthes ventrata, the classic grocery store monkey cup pitcher plant. It's ventricosa crossed with alata, and basically the goal of that was to have a fast growing, hardy plant that people could have in their house. And it's still very pretty. Like it's a good plant. There's not very many plants out there that I look at and I'm like, yeah, that thing's bad, right? They all look good. And so like the goal of that one was make it so that people can have a really cool house plant. And so your goals can be different. And a lot of times if hardiness and speed of growth is your goal, you do get into those more complex hybrids that are pretty mudded up.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is definitely something that people overlook, especially I think with the way anthurium collectors have been going as of recently. It's been a lot more about the visual, a lot more about the, how dark can I get this leaf? How, wide can I get the sinus on this thing, or whatever the case may be. And I think it has its time and place. I think it's cool, but I do think people overlook the growing habits of the anthuriums a lot, and how you can create oftentimes even a better plant for most consumers just based on crossing it with something that makes it an easier plant to grow. Like Splendidum, for example, that plant has been notorious for being, the hardest anthurium to grow, or the most sensitive anthurium to grow. Yes, it does need to live in a box. It does need to live in 100%, almost 100% humidity. Typically stagnant. A little airflow isn't bad, but it really doesn't take to anything outside of that. It'll just crash. It'll wilt. And same with debilis and or debile. That's another one that's pretty sensitive to the lack of humidity or stagnant air. It needs that thick, moist air to really thrive. I think using those in crosses could really bring out some more desirable plants that are a lot easier to keep. So those are definitely some plants that are in my my program that I do plan to make crosses with and make a little bit easier to grow. Splendidum being, I think, one of the first ones that I'm probably going to use coming up pretty soon. So
Which
Yeah.
those a lot of the anthuriums, a lot of people don't, or a lot of people don't think of them because they've always been really expensive. But now that their prices are starting to come down a bit with some species, some of those anthuriums, like Splendidum, make really good terrarium plants for like dart frog tanks or um obviously Splendidum for dart frogs because they're like super wet and stagnant air and stuff. But other things like if it's just smaller anthurium species, you can use them in a lot of tropical setups. In your like these displays tanks that we're talking about using as like decor, that is a beautiful plant with some crazy colors when they have new leaves coming in. That would be an amazing showpiece plant for one of these like setups you would have in your house.
Like, I say don't be afraid to put fancier plants in your tanks. I think a lot of people fear that they're gonna die, but really, dude, we're creating these tanks to be these stable, nice conditions for the animal, and the animals tend to live alongside these plants in nature. Like, don't be afraid, just put them in there. Most of my plants that do great are actually vivarium plants. But we're getting a bit off topic here, starting to get rambly again, and been here for a while. Getting late. It's a night recording for all of us here.
oh yeah.
Uh, but so we'll wrap her up. Uh, just remember, bringing nature into your home. Big points are go big. Take your time. If it's gonna take time to do it right, take time to do it right. Um, as usual, Instagrams for the podcast, and me and Alex will be in the bio. We'll put Owen in there too, but I'm gonna let him shout out his own because, like he said, he's got 150 of these little plants that he's gonna eventually need buyers for. Probably won't hurt to plug his Instagram over here. So, Owen, where can we find you?
Appreciate the shout out, Shaw. My Instagram handle is Owen's Jungle, so Owen SJUNGLE. I think is how you spell jungle. It's getting late. My brain's a little mushy, but Owen's Jungle. That's where you can find me.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. Have a nice day, everybody, and we will catch you on the next episode.
See you guys later.
See ya.